Way of the Wolf is one of those classic sales books it's just awesome. It kind of gives you the whole overarching view of the whole sales process. And a lot of some of the books I've read, they just focus on the exact words that you say in the pitches. A book like Tom Hopkins' book, like it's one of those classic sales books. For me, it was a little too dry. I didn't get the whole picture. But for me, this is up there with some of the books like Sell or Be Sold by Grant Cardone, Trump: The Art of the Deal, where he's doing tons of negotiations, Expert Secrets by Russell Brunson, and I would say Way of the Wolf would be my top 4 sales books of all time. Definitely a must read. I want to give you kind of my book review on the book, so let's get into it. So the first thing is the story of how he came up with it. Some of these books, they just dive right in to the nuts and bolts. I'm really a story guy. I really appreciate the books that go into the stories and go into, here's how I came up with this, and here's how you can practically use it, and here are some stories and examples of how you use it versus say this and then say this and then say this. I'm like, I have no idea if that actually works because I can't see an example. I don't know how I'd apply that in my own life. So his story goes like this. He was sitting there. Maybe you've seen The Wolf of Wall Street. I haven't seen it just because it kind of looks like one of those raunchy movies. But I would love to see it for the sales and the business side of things. So maybe if there's an edited version, maybe I'll go ahead and watch that. But the story goes is that he's the sales leader. He's the owner of these guys, and he calls them the Strattonites because their company's called, I think, Stratton something. And so he has these Strattonites, and there's him and one other guy. They're just selling consistently, and they're selling to rich people, and they're just selling, and they're selling stocks, and they're just selling consistently. But all these other Strattonites, he said, they could barely. He's like, I don't know if they could actually tie their shoes themselves. That's how incompetent they were. They couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. They were that incompetent. Okay? These guys didn't have any special skills. They were actually the bottom of the barrel. And he's like, you couldn't teach these cats to do anything. Okay? Which really emphasized to me and gives me comfort because I'm like, I'm not a natural seller. I'm not a natural salesman. I feel like this doesn't come easy to me. So there's some hope there. Well, he says one night he's sitting there and he gets up in front of them. He's like, we're going to continue all night if we have to until we get some sales. And they're like, it's too hard. We can't do it. And he's like, what's so hard about this? I mean, me and this other guy, we're getting sales. He's like, yeah, but you guys are special. You guys are born sales leaders. And it goes back to the question of, is it nature or is it nurture? Are you born with it or can you develop it? And that's one of the big questions, not only in sales, but kind of in life, of people have this idea of like, oh, you're born this way and you can't change. Or maybe you're born with some things, but you can develop and get better and better and better, okay? Well, he's sitting there and he's like, okay, so what's so hard? He's like, they just give so many complaints. I can't handle all the complaints. He's like, okay, great. What are the complaints? Let me list out all 5 million of these complaints that you guys are saying that you can't answer. And he's like, go ahead, name some. And one of the guys is like, it's not the right time of year. He's like, great, I just wrote down one. Only 4,999,000 to go. Who else has one? They all look around. They're like, I don't have money. Great, I don't have money. It's Easter Sunday. I need to wait a little bit longer. Great. Writes down 3 of them. He's like, only 5 million to go. Let's keep it going. And so they keep on giving these objections. And he said that they only came up with 20 objections. And he said, and a lot of them narrowed into just a few categories, like it's not the right time to buy, it's Easter or it's Christmas or it's Thanksgiving or it's Hanukkah, and it all kind of went into one. And he's like, really, there were only, I think he said there were only like 13 objections. And he's like, oh, so instead of 5 million objections, there are only 13 objections. Okay, let's go through. How would I answer each one of these? And he goes through, and right there he said it was like an epiphany. It was just this idea that came to him while he was sitting up there. I'm not sure if you've been able to experience that. I'm sure you have with something in your life. I've had that many times where I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, that's a great idea. And I start to write it down. And it's just this idea from above comes in, and you write down, that's exactly what he said. And he came up with this straight line system. And he started to teach the Stratonites that were there that very night. Well, he said before that point, they weren't selling nothing. Like they were about to leave because they weren't making any money. And he said over the next 3 months, not one of them had made less than $1 million in commission. Isn't that insane? Not one of them had made less than $1 million in commission in 3 months. And he said, and he had to say this many times because he ended up going to jail because some of the things that he was selling, it was dishonest. But he said, put that aside, the way that we were selling it was good. And I did a video not too long ago about the mafia and how you should model your business after the mafia. Now, you shouldn't do what they do, but you should do it how they do it. Okay? There are a lot of things like working in teams and having a system of hierarchy and all these things that the mafia does. You should model that, but not what they do. Okay? Well, same thing with this. He's like, you should model the system that I had, how I did it, but the what that I did, some of the things that we sold were dishonest, and I ended up going to jail for it. And he said, always make sure that you're selling to people that need your product. It has to actually benefit their life, okay? The three takeaways I took from the sales process of basically how it works, he calls it the straight line system. And the first two I really appreciate because they're not the words that you say, because selling is 90% nonverbal, right? I'm sure you've heard that 1,000 times. Well, it's true. It's true that communication is 90% nonverbal. He gives this example. He's like, when like even doing this video, for example, let's say that instead of me sitting right here, I'm like this, right in your face, and how uncomfortable is that? You're gonna turn off this video and you're gonna be like, man, he's just in my space, right? That's not the words that I'm saying. That's how I'm presenting. Imagine instead of this background I have this crappy background, or imagine instead of this nice shirt, I have just some raggedy old t-shirt, like all these, and my hair's like all messed up and it's all crazy. All of these things matter, right? You have to be presentable. And that's the first lesson that he goes into, is tonality and body language. The voice that you use, and the voice that you use to communicate something, and then also how you present yourself. So body language first, he talks about where to stand. He says, we all know those people that just stand way too close to us, that come into our bubble, and they stand way too close, and you're just like, okay, it's a little too close. It's like, usually those people are the spitters as well. So you're trying to get a windshield wiper, and you're like, okay, just back it up a little bit. You're a little too close. That's body language. Nobody wants to do deals with people that have bad body language because it's just off-putting. Okay? Same with your tonality. One other point with body language is also the clothes that, like I said, the clothes you wear, how you present yourself, smiling, being happy, and that's just the entry ground. And he talks about just some practical things. He's like, make sure you take a shower every day. Make sure you don't smell. Make sure you're brushing your teeth. Make sure your teeth are white. Make sure your teeth are straight. Make sure your hair is groomed. Make sure you're wearing the appropriate clothing. And all of these things, imagine if, so you can say, okay, so I need to be well groomed and wear a collared shirt, and I need to do all these things, okay? Well, the other side of the coin to that is you have to do what is best for your customer. So let's say that I'm a tattoo specialist, okay? Let's say I go in with a nice coat, jacket, and suit and cufflinks, and my hair is all done. I don't have any tattoos. Well, the person coming in is not gonna trust me. They're like, dude, this guy doesn't even have any tattoos himself. He looks like he couldn't even relate to me. You have to be relatable to your customer. Being the salesman, okay? You can own the business and you can whatever, but whoever you're selling to, you have to be relatable to them, okay? So whether you're selling insurance, my business, we do country dancing. So if I showed up in a suit, or if I showed up in spiky green hair, if I showed up in anything but jeans and either a t-shirt or maybe a collared shirt and probably some boots, maybe some tennis shoes, then anything other than that, then they're not going to be as sold, okay? And it's a spectrum. So if I show up boots, jeans, a cowboy hat, or a baseball cap, I know what my customers want. And so it's figuring out what your customers are like and what they want to see, okay? And then along with body language is tonality. He gives this example of, and he gives many different examples. That's why you have to read the book. You can't get everything from this book review. It's just a review to see if you're actually going to want to read or listen to the book. He gives this, and I actually like listening to the books because then he actually reads his own book, which is one of the cool things about this book. And he gives the tonality so you can hear how he says things. He gives this example of when he's a kid, and I'm sure all of our moms did this, was he said, my mom, whenever she would call me down for lunch, she would say, Jordan, just like that, Jordan, okay? And he said, I know that was kind of a sing-songy tone, and that was happy to see you. But if she said, Jordan, and ended it kind of low, then she was more serious. Jordan versus Jordan. You can hear the difference. We all know intuitively the difference, but how often do we use these different tonalities in our sales pitches? That's something that I want to improve on, is using different tonalities. One other example, he says when you're presenting the sale, if you lean in closely and you lower your voice and you say, and you kind of look around and you say, we actually just got this deal off the market today and we have a very special offer on it. And I want to make sure that you know about it first. And you lower your voice. So it's a secret. I'm gonna tell you something that not very many people know. Then they're like, are you serious? It's urgent. It's serious. And all of these things are true, and I can be super excited about it. I'm like, you got to hear about this deal. It's so crazy. I'm saying the same words. The words don't change, but how I change my tonality really affects how you perceive the deal, okay? So if you want to make sure that they know that this deal is very special, then lean in and kind of look around and say, we actually got this deal, and lower your voice. It's really cool. And he goes through these 10 different tonalities that I think you're really going to enjoy. Lesson, I guess we're on number 3, body language tonality. He talks about state management. Now this is something that I just barely heard, so I haven't tried it out myself. But essentially the idea is you want to reinforce your positive states. So let's say the example of you're going into the sales deal. you're going onto a sales call, let's say, and you're just like, I don't know if they're gonna be able, I don't know if they're gonna buy, and I've heard so many no's and so many things. Imagine if you could like immediately just change your state like that, and you're like, I'm gonna rock this deal. Let's go in, and you have a ton of tenacity all of a sudden. Well, his strategy for doing this, he says it follows a similar pattern of what they do with dogs. So they, back in like the 50s or some 40s, whenever a dog would do something good, then they would ring a bell. Okay? And so every time the dog did this thing good, then they would ring a bell, right? Today we give like treats to them, but back in the day they would ring this bell. Well, it trained their ear, so whenever they would hear this bell, then they knew that they would do something good. Well, he said that he developed something that was very similar, and it was just smelling this certain thing, that every time he did something good, then he would take a smell of this. I can't remember. It called it boom boom. I don't even know what the freak the thing was. But the idea is basically either smelling, and he said actually smell is the best because now I've heard this before that it's the closest thing to our memory. Our smelling senses, our olfactory senses, link the closest to our memory. That's why he does smell. Like if we hear something, we're not going to remember it as well as if we smell something. Like if you go into a room and you smell something funny, you're like, man, it reminds me of my grandma's house like 20 years ago, and we have a really good memory of it. Versus like somebody says something, we don't have as good of a memory. So you can do like verbal confirmations where you're listening to it, or you can flash something in front of your face and you can see it with your eyes. But he's saying the best way to do it is by smelling something. So pick a unique smell. He said though the way that you do it is every time you make a smell, or every time you make a sale, smell this thing, and it will reinforce you. And then when you're going through a downturn on your sales, then you want to get back into the groove. Then you pick up this thing, and you smell it, and you're good to go. It's kind of like Inception, where they have their own little device that they can only touch. It's kind of the same concept that you smell that thing. It's kind of funny. Leonardo DiCaprio plays both people in those movies. But you just take this thing and you smell it, and then it reinforces that good behavior, just like they do with dogs. So that's about keeping your state up and about reinforcing your good behavior. And the last thing is the actual sales process. He walks through these 10 points on the sales process, and he calls it the straight line for a reason. It's a straight line because he says you want to pick the straightest line to the sale from your customer, point A, to the sale of point B, okay? And you want to get the closest path to this possible. I was talking with my cousin the other day, and he talked about the same principle. He didn't talk about the way of the wolf. And then when I read this book, I was like, oh, that's exactly what he was saying. And he does summer sales. He's done it for the past 5 years. And he talked about how basically the idea is you want to have this straight line. Now most people that you're going to sell to aren't going to go exactly on this line. Now, when they go on the line and then they say, oh, here's an objection, it's just a smoke screen. It's just an excuse. It's not the real reason. And so you're trying to bring them back into the straight line. And then they go off, and then you bring them back, and go off and bring them back, go off and bring them back, and then you make the sale down here. But what most people do is they go all the way off over here until you're over here in Pluto talking about the price of tea in China. And it's like, what the heck are you talking about? He said one time he was listening to this guy, and one of his salesmen, and the salesman was talking about duck hunting in England. And he talked about it for 20 minutes, and Jordan was just sitting there for 20 minutes. And then he finally hung up the phone. He's like, oh man, I was so close to making that sale. And Jordan's like, no, you weren't. He's like, what? I was building up so much rapport with him. I was talking about duck hunting. He's like, when was the last time you went duck hunting? He's like, by the looks of it, I don't think they have much duck hunting in India where you're from. He's like, no, but I was trying to be like him. He's like, it doesn't help to lie to him. So one, he was lying to him, that he didn't do any duck hunting. But two, he was trying to relate on something that wasn't connected with the product. And so Jordan's like, you weren't close to making the sale because you were all the way off over here in Pluto talking about duck hunting in England. That doesn't have anything to do with stocks. Okay? So what you do is when they come up with something and they're like, oh yeah, that reminds me of duck hunting in England. Be very polite about it. Oh, that's very cool. That's so cool that you do duck hunting in England. So let's look at this deal and you bring it back to the deal. Okay? Bring it back to the straight line. You don't want to be like, okay, we're not talking about what you want to talk about. You very politely bring it back and you resolve either their question or their concern, and he talks about how to answer these concerns. But the main idea is just this straight line system, the shortest path from meeting your customer to making the sale. So that's my book report. My book report. Look at me. That's my book review of Way of the Wolf by Jordan Belfort. Highly recommend it. Go ahead, get the book or listen to it. I listen to it on Audible. I should probably be a sponsor of theirs because I recommend Audible to all of my friends. But yeah, really highly recommend it and hope you enjoy it.